Hi. Hi. Everybody feels really close today. I kind of like it. Good afternoon. I'm Christa Wessel, the morning host at All Classical Portland. Yay! I like the enthusiasm. That's great. You're listening. You probably know we're in the middle of our pledge drive, right? Should we all say the phone number together? 1-888-899-5722. We're 25% of the way to our pledge drive goal as of today, so we're making progress, but we'd love your help. End of pitch. You can also go online at allclassical.org to find out more about the station if you weren't even aware we had a classical station in town. Okay. This guy right here to my right is one of my favorite people in the world, I've determined. He's in the violin section of the Oregon Symphony. His name is Greg Ewer.
Thanks, Christa. You say that to all the fiddle players.
No, you're special. You not only have played in this symphony for how many? Wait a minute, 13 years?
Yep, this is 13.
13 years, but you are also mightily busy at a number of other organizations in town. Let me see if I can list them all.
Go.
Okay, you are the artistic director of the chamber ensemble 45th Parallel, in which you also play.
That's true.
You play with the Third Angle New Music Ensemble.
Indeed.
You teach at a couple of different colleges. Remind me which ones.
Reed and Lewis and Clark.
Okay. You're on the board of the Portland Youth Philharmonic. What have I missed?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I think that's a pretty good list. We can stop there.
He's a busy guy. And being in the Oregon Symphony is certainly a demanding job as well. 13 years, that means 2001 was your first year?
Yeah, I moved to Portland in 2000 and got into the symphony in 2001.
So you are one of the people, most of the musicians I end up interviewing moved here because they got a job in the symphony. It doesn't sound like timing-wise that was your story at all.
Right. The reason that I ended up moving to Portland is because I was the stage manager of the Cascade Head Festival. When I was in graduate school, I studied with Sergiu Luca, and he was the artistic director out there, and he invited me up one summer. I think it was the summer of '98 or maybe '99. Anyway, so I was out there for about 3 weeks, and then a good friend invited me to Portland to stay with her for a few days and show me around, and we went to the, Multnomah Falls and all the amazing places in the gorge and walked around downtown. And in Houston, where I'm from, nobody walks around. Everybody drives, stays, in their cars with the windows up and the AC on just because it's unbearable otherwise. But, here it was beautiful. The sun was shining and, I was hooked. I promised myself at that point, at some point, I'm going to live in Portland. And so a year later, I, rented the U-Haul, and the rest is history.
So what did you do once you got here? Were you just playing violin, gigging around?
Well, I had a very good friend living here already. He's a good buddy of mine who performs with 45th Parallel a lot. His name is Adam Lamont. He also plays with Portland Baroque Orchestra. So he was actually, we actually rode up in the U-Haul together, and after the lecture's over, I can tell you all the stories. But anyway, so for the first few years, we played a lot of chamber music together under sort of the umbrella of the Magnolia Chamber Ensemble. So that was kind of a big activity of mine over the first few years, but I still needed to make a living, and I was lucky enough to have met Paul Schuback before I moved here. He's the one with the violin shop that for many years was on the corner of Southeast Milwaukee and Powell.
He's also a supporter of All Classical Portland.
Oh, I'm not surprised. He's a good guy. So he offered me the chance to work in his shop while I figured myself out, and I worked there for about 9 months selling strings, and I actually met a lot of the people from the symphony that way. They didn't know that I was a violinist at the time. They just knew that I was the kid who had just moved to Portland and who was, ringing up the strings and stuff like that. But yeah, that time at Paul's shop allowed me to figure out what were the options here in Portland, and was I going to be able to make a living here, or was I going to? I was on a year's leave of absence from my position with the Houston Grand Opera, And so the plan was either to figure something out here or then, you know, rejoin the orchestra back there. So anyway, in about March, the audition came up, and, you know, it was in the stars. I had a good day, feel very lucky to have gotten the job here, and so here I am.
Okay, I love audition stories. I feel like every musician that I interview has an interesting story to tell us about the audition process. Can you tell me about yours?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was much like a lot of other audition stories. It's kind of, you have to kind of go into an all or nothing mode. You know, 3 or 4 hours of practice every day and studying your scores and making sure that you really know the context of the musical excerpts that you're playing. And, you know, because you know that maybe 100 or 200 people are going to show up and be competing for that spot. So it's kind of it's a high energy, high commitment, and high reward kind of process. So the first 2 rounds, you come up on stage and there's a screen, and either the committee is here in the audience and the screen is between you, or maybe they're on stage and the screen is in between you and them. And you get about 5-7 minutes to play through your material. And at that point, they say, thank you very much, and that's it. And then you walk off stage and you wait for probably about an hour until they say, okay, you've gone through to the next round, or thank you very much. You know, we hope to see you at the next audition. So anyway, the first 2 rounds go about like that for just about everybody. And then the final round kind of got interesting for me, because for the last couple of years, I had been trying kind of an experimental approach to bowing. It wasn't really experimental, it was just that I was very interested in the old Russian school of training. And although that was not my background, I kind of adopted it because I was interested in it. And it looks very different from what most of us modern players do. So as the screen came down and I played through the final round, there was a little interview at the end of that. And Michael Foxman was the concertmaster at the time, and Peter Fergiola was also on the audition committee. And they said, you know, you sound great, and, you know, we'd love to work with you, but what on earth are you doing? So I had to explain that, yeah, Peter said, I think, you know, that's the most pronounced Russian bow hold that I've ever seen. It's like, who do you study with? And so I had to then go say that, you know, it was kind of an experiment that I had been doing for the last couple of years, and that I could still, you know, I could still do it the other way. It's just that this is what I was used to at the time. So
We talked about this a little bit last night in our pre-concert chat before Hillary Hahn's concert, like it's her concert. That's all y'all's concert. And I was astounded to learn that there's more than one way that you can hold a bow. I just thought you put it in your hand and away you go. So can I saw you brought your violin. Can you demonstrate?
she made me do this.
Can you demonstrate the so-called normal way of
Sure.
holding a bow versus this remarkable Russian way that you were holding it?
You're not really going to be able to hear much of a difference, but you can get the idea that it's a totally different set of muscles that you have to train in order to do it. All right, I'm going to put this down.
Is this an old violin? Is this a new violin?
It was actually made by my next door neighbor growing up in Houston. I'll tell you more about it. Okay, so the way that most people use the bow is there's kind of a lever technique to it. The fulcrum is the thumb on the bottom, and if you put the weight towards the index finger, you make a lot of sound. If you use your back fingers to do it, you take the weight off the bow and suspend it of sorts. And this is kind of the modern way of doing things. As I mentioned, it's not going to sound very different, but it looks different. And the old Russian school is kind of more held on the sides, and it looks something like this. And so, you know, here's what it sounds like. You know, and it's not that you're necessarily noticing a lot of difference, but it is a whole different set of muscles that you have to use.
So why toy with this new grip? What are the advantages of both styles of holding the bow?
Well, the advantage to the lever technique is that you can go from loud to soft immediately without, you know, with using a fairly predictable and simple mechanism with these two fingers. You know, it's either loud or soft. And with the other grip, the whole idea is that you're kind of glued to the string and there's a lot more weight. So it's a little more difficult to play softly. You kind of have to lift the whole arm. And that actually is one of the reasons why it's not so well suited to kind of our modern violin section, because that's just not really, it's not really kind of the modern way of training. It's more for, you know, the old romantic tradition where it was all about long lines and seamless bow changes and things like that. When the weight is more constant, that's a lot easier to do. So.
I gotcha. Do you play that way anymore with the old Russian grip?
You know, I haven't done it for a while. After about a year in the symphony, I decided I was just going to go back to the modern way and blend with everybody else and peer pressure. No, but I've toyed with the idea of at some point maybe doing a recital where I play certain pieces with the old and certain pieces with the new and just see whether people, you know, perceive any significant difference. Yeah, just something for the future maybe.
Don't put that away yet. Because a little birdie told me that at one point you were in a bluegrass band. Did you play fiddle in a bluegrass band?
No.
Would you do a little fiddling for us? Would you mind? Even though it's kind of incongruous to have a tuxedo wearing bluegrass fiddler, I want to see it anyway.
I've already broken the first rule of bluegrass, which is don't tune.
Tuning. Thank you. Oh, that made my day. That was fantastic. As the artistic director of 45th Parallel, y'all just presented a kind of a bluegrassy Americana concert a couple weeks ago, and that was really fun. You got to do some fiddling there on stage at the Alberta Rose.
Yeah, that was a really fun concert. We were joined by Portland's own Kenji Bunch. Anybody in the audience know that name?
He's playing in the concerts this weekend, too.
He's playing in the viola section today. Well, he grew up in Portland, and he played with Portland Youth Philharmonic, an amazing organization. I'm on the board, and if you haven't heard PYP lately, they are an amazing group of kids. They just did Shostakovich's Fourth Symphony, which is a very rarely performed piece because it requires so many people. And so it was actually the first time in my life I've ever heard it live, and they did an amazing job. So keep your eye on PYP, they're great. But anyway, Kenji played in PYP, and then he went off and studied in lots of prestigious places and was teaching at Juilliard for a while, and recently moved back to Portland. And the guy is an amazing composer. He has kind of incorporated some elements of bluegrass bowings. They're not even really bluegrass bowings, but just much more rhythmic bowings into a couple of pieces that he's written for solo viola. And so the fact that we were doing some kind of a modern day take on Americana, I thought that would be a really perfect addition to the concert because it takes some of these rhythmic elements and puts them front and center in a composition for solo viola. I know this isn't really, the norm, but it's really creative stuff, really inventive, and so we kind of made a case that the idea, not necessarily of Americana, but of contemporary American music is changing a bit, and it's incorporating things that are not usually associated with certainly string playing, because string playing is usually a very melodic or harmonic phenomenon. And these days people are taking some of these rhythmic chops and putting them front and center on string instruments and making rhythmic instruments out of these traditionally melodic instruments. Anyway, we mixed it up a little bit and had a good time exploring some of that territory.
Yeah.
We had a beatboxer, and yeah. It was
And 45th Parallel's got another concert coming up in, gosh, just a little over a week? On the 18th, Tuesday the 18th?
Yeah, we are doing a concert of sextets. Sarah Kwok, our wonderful new concertmaster, is joining us, and Nancy Ives, Hamilton Chaffetz from the Florestan Trio is going to play, and Kenji is going to play. My buddy Adam Lamont from Portland Baroque Orchestra is going to play. Jen Arnold. I know that's more than 6, but we're kind of swapping out for each other. And we're doing Brahms and the Schoenberg Verklärte Nacht, Transfigured Night, and the U.S. premiere of a piece by Peter Maxwell Davies called The Last Island. It's kind of inspired by these 2 islands that he lives very close to. One of them you can actually walk to at low tide, and the piece has a lot of interesting bird noises in it, and it is a contemporary sounding, slightly difficult piece to hear on first listening, but it's fascinating, all the different sounds that are there, and we're really excited to be doing the U.S. premiere of it.
So that's Tuesday the 18th, 45th Parallel, the organization for which Greg Ewer is artistic director at the Old Church, just a few blocks away.
That's right.
All right, so we heard the Bluegrass, and you mentioned that you grew up in Houston. I'm assuming that's where the love of Bluegrass came from.
Well, it actually had, yeah. The reason that whole thing came about is that I had a good friend who played the tuba. And
wait, that doesn't make any sense.
That was, yeah, it is kind of silly. He played the tuba. Anyway, he was in an ethnomusicology class and decided to use bluegrass for his big semester project. So he recruited me and a bass player to learn a little bluegrass tune. And it turns out that this guy was truly one of the best banjo players in the state of Texas. The year before, he had won the state banjo championship or something like that. And the guy was a real virtuoso. He was actually transcribing some very difficult violin music for banjo, a la Bela Fleck. And it was very impressive, and I just had a great time. So we decided we would try to recruit a guitarist and a mandolin player and try to play some gigs together. And we ended up staying together as a band for about 3 years.
Were you ever swayed to give up classical music at any point in your education, your trajectory? Were you considering maybe branching off and doing something other than classical music for a while?
You know, I think I flirted with the idea a little bit, but I also realized that as hard as it is to make a living in classical music, it's even harder to make a living going around playing bluegrass festivals. I mean, it's fun, don't get me wrong, but as a career path, you just have to really be at the top of your field, and I was kind of a novice at it, so it wasn't something I considered seriously.
And going back even further yet, was music a part of your life from a very young age? Did you come to it kind of later in life? Tell us how you got interested in the violin to begin with.
Well, as so many things do, I was influenced by my parents. My father, although he ended up becoming a cardiologist, was very interested in the violin, and so when I was a kid, he wanted to give me violin lessons. So he actually chose a house when we moved to Houston. I was actually born in Dallas, and my family moved to Houston a year later. But he chose a school that was right across the street from one of the most prominent musical elementary schools in Houston, and actually, as it turns out, as I've learned recently, in the country, because he wanted me to be zoned to it and make sure that I had this musical exposure. And the school was really fantastic, and I took lessons at this elementary school for about 3 years and had after-school classes there, and without that, I think it's pretty safe to say that I would not be playing the violin today. After a few years of that, I went on to study with a member of the Houston Symphony. He was the associate concertmaster, and he was recommended by my teacher at the elementary school at the time. And so I ended up studying with him for the next 9 years of my life. And you asked me about this violin earlier. There's a tie-in here because at the time, this whole time that I was kind of growing up in Houston taking lessons, we moved, my family, this was the second time we moved, and the second great coincidence of our location was that we moved across the street from a violin maker who was also a violinist who was in the Houston Symphony and happened to be a really fine violin maker. So, you know, some days after school I would, you know, whatever, go to the park and play basketball, but other days I would actually go and visit him, and he would show me little bits and pieces of how violins were made, and I would kind of help him scrape wood off of these, you know, things that were eventually going to become the top and the bottom of the violin. And so that was kind of a really serendipitous development.
So have you had this particular violin since you were a kid, or is this a relatively recent acquisition?
No, I've had that violin probably since my 13th or 14th birthday, I think. And I have other ones, but this is the one that is, I think, in some ways the most stable and the most versatile. I mean, it sounds great when I play it, you know, in a recording session. It's got a lot of low fundamentals. Sometimes when you put a microphone on high fundamentals, it gets a little harsh. This does not have that problem. It also projects very well, so I use it for a lot of chamber music. It's easy to blend with, so I use it here in the Oregon Symphony. So it's really versatile. I have other violins for different things, but this is the one I always come back to.
Well, it sounds really fortuitous that your dad then chose not only to move to this particular school district where you got a really good education in elementary school in the violin, but also next door to a violin maker. Like,
I know, it's kind of remarkable when you think about it. Yeah, hard to duplicate.
So, from a very young, like you said, you're in elementary school, you're taking violin lessons from the associate concertmaster of the Houston Symphony. It sounds like you were on that trajectory. Did you ever, I mean, was that it, classical music for you, or did you ever think, oh, I want to be a doctor, cardiologist like my dad?
You know, while I was in junior high was kind of the point in all of that where I deviated from this a little bit. The junior high school was definitely not music related. It was sort of purported to be a science and math school, but it was really kind of a rough and tumble place, and there, telling anybody that you played the violin was a bad idea. So after one semester in orchestra, I ditched it, and you know, I got with the program a little bit and spent a lot more time in the gym and, you know, playing basketball and certain things like that. And the ironic thing about all that is that a good friend that I still perform with and who's actually performing with me on the 18th rode the bus to school with me every day at junior high. But the whole time, I had no idea he played the violin. He had no idea I played the violin.
It was that secret. Like you really couldn't tell anybody you were a musician in that junior high.
Well, yeah, it's not that I, you know, went to great lengths to hide it. It was just a very unuseful piece of information. Wasn't going to help me, and probably was going to do just the opposite. So anyway, that was, you know, my own little secret, I guess.
So what kind of life did you lead then, if not a public artist life in junior high? You mentioned basketball, sports.
Well, you know, I think I was a lot more involved with, you know, sort of the organized sports at the junior high level, however organized that actually can be. But you know, it was just a, you know, it was kind of a rough place. You know, lots of fist fights and that. It was just, you know, that kind of school, and I think that was one of the reasons why I ended up feeling so relieved when I realized that there was a really great arts high school in Houston, the High School for Performing and Visual Arts. And so I ended up going there, and there were no sports teams there, but there were 3 hours a day that you were able to spend on your art form. The academics also happened to be really strong there, and so it was just a great place to go. And I showed up there, and all of a sudden I see Adam there, and I was like, what are you doing here?
You play violin? Yeah.
Sure enough.
Well, as a violinist, I want your take on what we're going to see tonight from Hillary Hahn. She's playing a kind of, I don't want to say unknown concerto, but it's not the Beethoven concerto, it's not the Tchaikovsky concerto that we can all hum to ourselves. The Danish composer Carl Nielsen's violin concerto.
Well, it's a very, very pleasant piece to listen to. It's very accessible. It's kind of from the neoclassic tradition, a la Stravinsky. And I don't know if you know the Pulcinella suite that Stravinsky arranged. It's a little bit like that. It's got some old sounds in it. It's kind of one foot in the Baroque, a little bit of classical influence too. It's a very pleasant piece, and Hillary just, you know, plays the slats off it. It's amazing. She is an incredible musician, incredible technician, incredible musician, kind of, you know, somebody that all of us kind of look up to. And, you know, I heard last night that, you know, during the cadenza, somebody just looked over at the string section and we were all just like, I mean, she's that good.
And please applaud loudly after the concerto, because last night she came back and did an encore. I'm just even thinking about it, I'm getting chills. It was magnificent.
Yeah.
Musicians weeping on stage, from what I'm told. So please applaud loudly. And please tell your friends about these pre-concert chats. We love seeing you in the audience ahead of the concerts. Today's has been videotaped, so if you know a violinist who wants to learn information about weird bow grips or bluegrass fiddling, you can access the pre-concert chat on our website later on this evening, Joe, probably at allclassical.org. All of these chats are archived there for you to enjoy at your leisure. And if I could do one more plug, we are in the middle of Pledge Drive right now, our fundraiser. So if you go to check out the videos, just make sure you give a gift to, please, allclassical.org.
Well, and I just have to jump in here. I said this last night, and you know, she did not put me up to this, but I just have to say we are incredibly lucky in this town to have All Classical, because it's not just a radio station that puts out, you know, great music, but I mean, to a person, everybody on that staff, all the on-air hosts are really active in the community, helping out a lot of nonprofit organizations, and really just encouraging a whole community-wide, you know, appreciation and livelihood that is this music scene. It's pretty remarkable. We know all of the on-air hosts here in the orchestra, and they know all of us, and it's kind of like a big happy family. But the radio station is really an incredible resource. So thank you for, you know, all that you do. I want to mention the Leclerc.
Oh, right, yeah. So we mentioned Greg Ewer is the artistic director of 45th Parallel. They're putting on a concert of sextets on the 18th. You've also got news personally, too. And we mentioned Adam Lamott a couple of times today.
I keep bringing him into the conversation, but that's only because he's, you know, one of my oldest best friends. But we actually just completed a recording on Baroque violins of the 12 complete sonatas of Jean-Marie Leclerc. And it's going to be released later this month on the Dorian Sonoluminous label, which is a subsidiary of Naxos, if any of that means anything. So that's just my own little shameless plug.
We'll certainly hear it on All Classical Portland. How would we go about buying a copy? Probably Music Millennium or something?
I think, well, probably so, but also, you know, if you go online and just Google my name and Leclair, which is Leclair, it'll come up on lots of different places that you can now pre-order it, or after the 25th, order it. So thanks for letting me do a little plug.
This is a talented and busy guy. His name is Greg Ewer. I'm going to go let him warm up for the concert now. Thanks for doing this with me.
My pleasure, Christa. Thanks. Thanks for having me.